We switch gears today and begin to look at another kind of market, the market for labor. In many important ways, the labor market is going to look like other markets. It's governed by supply and demand. It uses prices, which in labor markets we call wages, to match up supply and demand and to clear the market, more or less. But there are a couple of big differences. First of all, firms and individuals switch their usual roles. In the labor market, firms are the consumers and they generate demand. So the demand for labor is actually what is called derived demand. How much labor they are willing and able to purchase will depend, you guessed it, on the price of that labor. Although, as we'll see, the story is a little more complicated than that. Second, and for many people more disturbingly, the very term labor market suggests that people are another commodity open for exchange. U.S. law specifically rejects this view of human labor. Note the preamble to the Clayton Act of 1914. If you remember your U.S. history, the Clayton Act was actually a follow-on to the Sherman Antitrust Act, and one of its important provisions was it said that union organizing was not an antitrust violation. The Catholic Church also rejects the view that labor is merely a commodity. Note the quote from Pope John Paul II's encyclical on work, which emphasizes that work is integral to the dignity and self-worth of individuals. For what it's worth, I agree with the statement of the law, and I agree with the Church's teaching. People are not just like potato chips to be bought and sold in the marketplace. Moreover, we've seen from the terrible scourges of slavery in the past and human trafficking in the present what happens when we allow men, women, and children to be considered as mere commodities without regard to their humanity. But, and I'm guessing you knew that a but was coming, didn't you? Let's face it. The marketplace does place a value, what economists call an economic rent, on the skills and capabilities we bring to the workforce. Another name for that set of skills and capabilities is human capital. And an important part of the reason you'll be starting college next year is to invest in your own human capital and, to raise your own personal economic rent. As this chart indicates, in sheer monetary terms, chemical engineers earn a higher return on their human capital than do musicians, social workers, or teachers. Does that mean that creating a chemical stew is somehow intrinsically more valuable than composing a song or teaching a child? Of course it doesn't, but it is an economic reality all the same. Something you should have figured out about market economics by now is that it ducks the question of value. Value is a completely circular concept. Value is what is valued, or in economic speak, value is defined as what people are willing and able to pay for something. When I was taking economics in college, there was, believe it or not, a California entrepreneur who made significant money selling pet rocks. His company gathered smooth stones from a beach in Mexico and put them in a cute little box, you see it here, complete with breathing holes and straw bedding to keep the rock comfortable. The rock even came with a pedigree certificate. This company actually sold around 1.5 million pet rocks for $4 a piece. The entrepreneur got rich. And you can still buy an original pet rock pedigree certificate for $19.95. I am not kidding. Google pet rock certificate on the web. I personally never bought a pet rock. I had a perfectly satisfactory pet dog, but people did. So in economic terms, pet rocks had value. Winston Churchill once commented that democracy was the worst of all political systems, except for all the rest. Market valuation is a lot like that. We don't like the idea of markets placing a price tag on people's worth. Maybe we aren't entirely comfortable with the idea of markets placing a price tag on the value of anything. But if markets don't decide through supply and demand, although through the votes of producers and consumers who, I would note, do not have equal numbers of dollars and therefore equal votes, then who decides what has value? Who decides prices or wages? The government central planning bureaucracy, a committee of economists, a committee of priests? How likely would we be to get the workforce we need to produce the goods and services we are willing and able, indeed eager to acquire under that kind of a circumstance? And that's what makes market economics both troubling and ultimately effective. So, probably like you, I'm not entirely comfortable with the way the market sets a value on our work, but I'm not entirely comfortable with the alternatives either. And with that long-winded introduction, I'm going to move on to the question of how the market sets a value on your labor and how you can use that information maybe to get a raise. Let's start with two video clips that actually pretty much give away the answer and are funny as well. The first is a short clip from a movie called Outsourced, about a guy whose whole department is shipped overseas to India and who is, to add insult to injury, sent to India to train his replacements. The second clip is from The Daily Show, and it's about an example of reversed outsourcing, onsourcing. By the way, this is a true story. Wham-O was the company that invented and produced the hula hoop, the slip and slide, and most important of all, the Frisbee. I've actually posted a series of History Channel vignettes about these major inventions in case you're interested. But I would note that the CEO of Wham-O should probably fire whoever talked him into agreeing to be interviewed by The Daily Show. Anyway, the question I want you to think about is what determines firms' hiring decisions? The answer is actually in these two videos, if you pay close attention. Uh-oh, fun's over. The graphs return. Do you remember that back when we were looking at what drives demand, we began with the question of why the demand curve is negatively sloped? Oops. Need to go back there. Why to get us to buy more of some goods and services does a supplier have to lower the price? Sorry about that. The answer, as you may or may not remember, was the law of diminishing marginal utility. Additional quantities of a good do not give us as much pleasure as earlier quantities. So to get us to buy more stuff, producers have to reduce the price of the stuff. The measure of how responsive consumers are to changes in price is the price elasticity of demand. A similar dynamic operates in the labor market. Now we get to switch slides. Work, or at least the income from work, also has declining marginal utility. And the more we work, the higher the opportunity cost in leisure forgone becomes for us. So let's say you have a part-time job, maybe 15 hours a week. With the money you can earn from that job, you can fill up your car, you can go to a movie, you can save for college. But suppose that your employer wants you to work 25 hours a week, 55 hours a week, 85 hours a week. Well, if you worked 85 hours a week, you wouldn't have time to drive anywhere, would you? You wouldn't have time to see any movies. It's also true that the first increment of income tends to be the most valuable. You are, after all, maximizing your marginal utility per dollar, right? And as you spend more dollars, you're pretty much by definition spending that money on goods that have a lower marginal utility per dollar than the first items you bought. So here's some more evidence to back the same point about an upwardly sloped labor supply curve, and this may surprise you. The graph is a little hard to read, so let me explain what it's showing. This is data from a study published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, the gold standard among economics publications. The economists who did the study were examining who worked especially long hours. They defined long hours as 49 hours a week. They broke down full-time workers, which they defined as workers who work at least 30 hours per week, into 5 quintiles by income. So the top quintile would be income earners in the upper 20% by income, and the bottom quintile would be income earners in the bottom 20%, etc. The study only looked at men, partly because women's working hours are more complicated by family responsibilities. But what they found was that upper income men work longer hours, and as one moves down the quintiles, the percent of workers who work longer hours declines rather significantly. If you think about it, that actually makes sense. The opportunity cost of choosing leisure over work is higher when work pays more. And anyone who knows doctors, lawyers, business executives, and other highly paid workers knows that most of them log a lot of time in the office. But this does rather fly in the face of conventional wisdom, that the so-called working class works harder and longer than the upper middle class. So, you've heard an explanation for why the supply curve for labor is positively sloped. Why is the demand curve for labor negatively sloped? In other words, why are employers willing and able to hire more people when wages are lower? The answer is another law, this time the law of diminishing returns. As more workers are hired, at some point the amount each new worker produces declines. The term for the incremental product from an additional worker or other factor of production is marginal physical product. You've seen this term before. Here's a marginal physical product chart, this time measuring the output of strawberries per hour based on the number of strawberry pickers. And here we see the same information presented graphically. We'll see how long it takes this graph to build. The pink curve, is it going to show up pink? Maybe not just yet. There we go. The pink curve is, do you remember? The production function. Represents total output. And the green curve, there it comes, is marginal physical product. Note that for this example, strawberry pickers, the graph shows marginal physical product beginning to decline with the third picker and actually turning negative with the eighth picker. And now, finally, we encounter something new and really important. Marginal revenue product is a term and a concept that you should stick in the hard drive. You may even want to try to hang on to it after May. This is the concept that you could conceivably use to argue yourself into a raise. Marginal revenue product is just what it sounds like. It is the amount of additional money that comes into the cash register as a result of hiring another worker and selling what he or she produces. And this is the really important part. An employer is going to lose money on an employee if that employee's wage costs more than the additional revenue that the employee brings in. So it's worth stopping and thinking about the implications of this. My old textbook used the example of strawberry pickers, which is why these are the figures you see on the slide. I have no idea if the numbers were or are realistic, but actually strawberry pickers are an excellent example of the dilemma that marginal revenue product poses for workers and employers. When this lecture is finished in just a minute, you are going to begin and I hope finish a reading quiz based on 2 articles about the economics of strawberries and strawberry picking. One is an article in The Atlantic. The article's old, it's from 1995, but I've read more recent accounts of the industry and I think it's still pretty accurate. It's also an article that won a number of awards for journalism. The second article is a much more recent analysis from the exciting publication entitled Vegetable Grower News. I did not, by the way, end up including any questions from a very interesting article that was written by an LA Times reporter who spent a day picking strawberries with migrant workers. I did put the article up on Moodle if you'd like to check it out. The author, who is himself the son of Mexican immigrants, notes in the article, and I quote, "You might think strawberries are carefully sorted, possibly by a machine, into the clamshells you buy at the supermarket after being washed at some facility. They are not. The strawberries are picked by field workers and placed directly into those containers. And you don't just throw strawberries into a clamshell and close it. They have to be sorted in a nice way so that the strawberries on top don't show much of the stem, just their redness. So this is hard work. It is also not very well paid work. Why not? Well, if you think about it, the upper limit of the hourly wage that an employer can afford to pay a strawberry picker is the market price of the strawberries that the worker can pick by hand in an hour. So you've probably guessed that the charts and graphs I showed you earlier mean more problem sets ahead, and you're right, but I'm going to stop. Leave that for tomorrow's lecture when I'll go through problem sets and give you a practice quiz. For now, you'll be entering the hard world of the strawberry picker. As always, I recommend you complete the reading quiz with a partner or partners. I will not set a time limit on the attempt itself, but the quiz will close in 1 week on Friday, April 24th.